says good afternoon, but it's barely.
Right, Beverly.
Hello, everyone. I am Ariel Bentaram, the board chair of the Greater Miami Jewish Federation. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's exciting program on the ground in Ukraine, reports from the front lines of the refugee crisis. You know, the number of people that have joined this seminar is a testimony to the concern that we all share about our brothers and sisters in the extended family that we all have in Ukraine, in Poland, and those who have gotten to Israel in safety and are now sharing in our homeland. If you are like me, you have a very short attention span, and all of the news about Ukraine and everything that's happening there is no longer front and center. But Baruch Hashem, thank God, we have Federation that is always on the spot, always working methodically, even when the headlines are no longer covering the war and taking care of all of the needs of our community everywhere in the world. Through our annual campaign, we were already in Ukraine for many years. We were serving tens of thousands of people, food, medicine, social services, community services, Israel summer camps, all sorts of things. So when the war came, we were already prepared. We already had an infrastructure there, and we were able to provide all of these amazing services. But as you know, the needs have, are skyrocketing with the war, and our annual campaign was no longer able to cover all of these amazing, extraordinary needs. And we came up with this specific campaign for Ukraine. And we are so proud that we have raised over $3 million from about 2,200 donors from our community. It is difficult to forecast how much more money we're going to need and what the needs are going to be in the future to rebuild a devastated community. But we know one thing for sure. Whatever the needs are, Miami is going to be there with all of our sister cities to support our sisters and brothers in Ukraine. I would like to acknowledge a few leadership people in our Zoom today. Lily Serviansky is the General Campaign Chair, Tammy Waldenberg and Elise Udelson, the Women Philanthropy Chair and Campaign Chair, Tracy Spiegelman, our Israel and Overseas Committee Chair, and Jacob Solomon, our President and CEO. It is now my pleasure to introduce Tracy Spiegelman. Tracy is currently our Israel and Overseas Committee Chair. She has served in so many positions that it's hard for me to even mention them, but I'm going to try to read a few for you. She's a former chair of the Federation's JCRC, Community Relations Council. She serves right now in our Jewish Federations of North America Board of Trustees, as well as on the Israel and Overseas Committee. And she is specifically now on the Jewish Federations of North America, our national institution in charge of Ukraine allocation. So she's front and center in everything we're doing there. And I would like to welcome her. And Tracy, please.
Thank you so much, Ariel. I'm not in charge of the allocations. I'm serving on the JFNA allocations committee, which is incredibly amazing due to all of the systems ability to really raise money to help in this effort. And these Ukraine allocations, as you'll hear more from the other speakers, have enabled incredible organizations to do great work. So the war in Ukraine has been going on for more than 5 months. It's hard for us all to keep track of time these days, but 5 months of terror. The Jewish Federation as a system immediately launched an emergency campaign to meet the needs of the 200,000 strong Jewish community in Ukraine and to aid them during this time of dire need. Actually, our ability, as Ariel mentioned, to immediately respond was aided by the advanced preparation of our partners, enabling the swift and organized immediate ability to meet these extraordinary needs. Again, as mentioned, the Allocations Committee, Ukraine Allocations Committee, was assembled by the Jewish Federations of North America, the Federation's umbrella organization, which I am incredibly honored and proud to serve on. As we began to plan and respond, we were reassured that our partner's strong presence that was in place now and prior to the invasion in Ukraine was made possible by the annual core unrestricted funding to our key global partners, including the Jewish Agency for Israel, the Joint Distribution Committee, and World Org. This core funding is what allows them to maintain an effective global 911 for the Jewish people and have boots on the ground in times of need. Of course, the Greater Miami Jewish Federation joined in the Federation System's wide emergency campaign for Ukraine. The collective emergency campaign has raised over $73 million to date and has made allocations to over 50 NGOs on the ground. The areas that have been designated as priority where the allocations have been made are temporary housing, humanitarian support, transportation, security, trauma relief, aliyah, and absorption. There have been 6 rounds of allocations, and this is an ongoing process. You'll be hearing from our speakers with examples about this incredibly important work. I wanted to share a bit about the work of the Jewish Agency for Israel. They have helped people across the borders and have provided security assistance grants to Jewish organizations in Ukraine, as well as facilitated the operation of summer camps run by local Jewish organizations. They have received more than 120,000 calls from Ukraine and Russia to their emergency hotlines. They have assisted 34,000 make aliyah from Ukraine and Russia. 12,293 Ukrainians and Russians have made aliyah since the start of the war, and there are over 40,000 aliyah forms submitted from people in Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus. To give you an idea of aliyah in numbers, in all of 2021 from Ukraine, there were 3,000 olim to Israel. Some of the other partners on the ground receiving emergency grants are World Org, in supporting staff, students, and families in its 6 Ukrainian schools who have remained in Ukraine, providing cash, food, and medicines for those sheltering in place. Chabad has been also providing food, medicines, and safe shelter to Ukrainian Jews who are sheltering in place. Chabad has facilitated the safe passage of those chosen to leave their homes and has arranged housing for them upon arrival in the neighboring countries, in addition to providing shelter for those that are internally displaced. Chabad has fed more than 20,000 Ukrainians and provided housing for more than 11,000. The Israel Trauma Coalition is training Jewish and non-Jewish personnel in Ukraine and surrounding countries on how to assist those affected by the conflict, many of whom are suffering from severe psychological trauma. They are also providing support for Ukrainian olim and the families of Ukrainians living in Israel. ITC has trained more than 2,500 psychologists serving tens of thousands of people, as well as dozens of psychologists serving Ukrainian responders. These are just a few examples of the life-saving work on the ground. Our incredible overseas partners are grateful for the steadfast Federation system support and understand we are also committed to meeting our local communities' annual needs.
Thank you so much, Tracy, and especially Oksana for your touching words. I know all of us have been deeply affected by them, and I think none of us are going to forget the smell of smoke in clothes and the smell of that soup after 36 hours and those horrible images of your building and the beautiful smile of the child in the last picture. So thank you so much. I mean, we can see the enormity of the task, not only of rescuing people, feeding them, etc., but now working on settlement and on case management and on making sure that all of these trauma centers are well done, and not to even mention all of the tens of thousands of people that have arrived in Israel and need all of our support to settle there and to become part of our amazing nation. So now I'm going to move to another Jewish hero, Dr. Enrique Ginsberg. And he's currently a professor of surgery, Division of Trauma and Surgical Care at Miller School of Medicine. And he was appointed Chief of Surgery at the University of Miami Hospital. He coordinates the affiliation between and the University of Tel Aviv. And he also was a founding coordinator of the trauma training program for Israel. Dr. Ginsberg's commitment to surgery and care has placed him front and center following the earthquake in Haiti, and as a member of the Global Surgical and Medical Support Group mission to Kurdistan in northern Iraq. Most recently, he has coordinated all of the development work of the Ukrainian humanitarian mission. And as we will learn, his work with the Global Surgical and Medical Support Group is funded by JFNA Ukraine Relief Fund. He's a native of Cuba, an active member of Temple Menorah in Miami Beach. And he not only helps all of these people with surgeries and medical attention, he puts himself in harm's way. He goes to these regions where there's war and puts himself in harm's way to bring in our holy work. So I really want to thank him and welcome him to our conversation. And I'm going to start with a few questions. Welcome, Dr. Ginsberg. Can we unmute Dr. Ginsberg? Great. So, the first thing that I wanted to ask you, I know, you have, as we mentioned, extensive experience as a trauma surgeon in all of these places in the world, Israel, Haiti, Kurdistan, and now in Ukraine. Can you explain to us a little bit of what's the role of a trauma surgeon when a catastrophe occurs or war occurs?
Well, really the role of the trauma surgeon, since he's so used to dealing with crises, even in Miami, when we have 4 or 5 people that are in accidents or gunshot wounds, whatever it is, we're used to that crisis thought pattern of trying to organize, keep calm as much as possible, and be sort of the commander of the situation and deal with that situation. So in these type of disasters, we take an extensive role, because not only can we deal with the medical aspects of the problem, but we can also deal with the coordinating aspects of a disaster.
Yeah, and I understand that you're wounded here in Miami, and you treat them in a nice hospital where nobody's bombarding you and sending rockets, or when there's not a mayhem around you. So I'm sure, and we'll hear about it in a few minutes, about how different this experience in Ukraine is. So you have worked, you told us, in this Global Surgical and Medical Support Group in Ukraine. You went there to sort of coordinate the deployment of all of these surgical teams and all of the infrastructure needs, and where can we go, which cities, and how much harm can be done to these hospitals, and is it safe for these doctors to go in? So can you tell us a bit about that work that you're doing, and also how did you come to know about JFNA and how the work that we're doing supporting all of your efforts? And obviously, if you can share a couple of stories of people that you have treated, it would be amazing.
Okay, so let me see where I get started. Really, the way this started is from my experience in Haiti. We had worked with Project Metashare with the Israelis very closely. We were there the first day with Dr. Barth Green from the University of Miami. And he and I, with two other fellows, went down. And it turns out that one of the fellows that we've trained from Israel in Miami ended up being on the tarmac the second day we were there. And we developed a coordinating program of treating the Haitians. So it turns out that during this event in Ukraine, the commander, which I became friends with and we worked together in Haiti, is the CEO of the hospital that was in Ukraine, right across the border. So I attempted to get in contact with him. And at the time, I also got in contact with Aaron Epstein, who is the president of Global Surgical and Medical Support Group, because they were both there, and tried to coordinate a visit because I didn't want to be left out of this event in trying to do some good in Ukraine. It's kind of one of these challenges that only comes once in a lifetime to a trauma surgeon, along with trying to, instead of just talking about Ukraine, doing something about Ukraine. So it was a very interesting dynamic of getting in to Ukraine and then going to the hospitals there. Now, when I got back, how did it? I'll go with the slides in one second. So after I got back from Ukraine, it was like we were asked by the Minister of Health from Ukraine and from the mayor of Lviv, because we ended up going to Lviv, although it had a few air raids, is much more calm, and if you want to call it safe, as compared to the east. And we were asked to start this program. So when I got back into Miami, I said, I've got to do something. And I'm not the fundraising type of guy, but this is the first time that I said, I really have to do something to get this program going. I was talking to one of my best friend's sons, David Agozi, and he told me he was with Jewish Federation and that they had a whole program for Ukraine. At that point, I then called Roberto Olenberg, Cuban Jewish, member of our temple and community, who I knew had contacts with Jewish Federation. I called Bob Diener, who also very active, very politically active, a strong humanitarian, just like Roberto. And then I called Marita Srebnik Feldenkrais and George Feldenkrais, and started to put what I called pressure on them, in the sense of, come on, can you do something for Ukraine? And of course, they stepped up to the plate and got me in touch with Jacob Solomon. And lo and behold, from that event came the #1 funding source for this program, which I'll describe. It's the only one of its kind, really, in Ukraine. It's not like Medicine Sans Frontières. It's not like all these other organizations you hear about, because we ended up, and I'll just show you, we got over there, and we can go with the first slide. This was in March, actually late March. And when we landed in Warsaw and then took a flight to Rzeszów, Rzeszów, as they pronounce it, which is right across in the Polish border. And this is where the 82nd Airborne of the United States has planted their troops. They cannot cross the border due to the politics involved. And this is what the airport looked like, basically like a small military for, a base. Next. We ended up, and I took my wife, Barbara. In that picture to the left of Barbara is Steve Wolf. Steve Wolf was in charge of all the burn program in Iraq during the Iraq War. Then that's Barb, myself, and then Aaron is next to me in the middle. Aaron is 35 years old, one of the most dynamic individuals I've ever met, president of Global Surgical and Medical, took me to Iraq to help over there. And next to him is John Holcomb. John Holcomb was in charge of all of trauma in Iraq during the war, and we were the first boots on the ground to go in there. And this is us in the safe house. What's funny is the minute we arrived after about 36 hours of travel, because the border is very difficult to get across, once we arrived, as we were leaving to go to where we were staying, which was a bit more comfortable and a safe haven due to the ownership of where we were. And I can't tell you any more than that. Once basically we arrived, and then we headed over. But once we were leaving that safe house, first air raids with the first barrage of missiles were sounded. We went back in, and then after the all clear sign was done, then we went on. Next. The next day, we headed to the hospital. This is Lviv Regional Clinical Hospital. It is like the Jackson Memorial Hospital of Western region of Ukraine. At that time, the way it works is that most of these patients that come in, both combat and civilian, they first come in by trains from the east, and then once stabilized, they came to this hospital. And that's where we went to, what we were directed to. Next. This is us with the young chief of surgery and trauma director with his head to us. John Holcomb is next to me, and I'm the one without the mask. And this is, we started talking and sort of organizing what it is we needed to do with them those several days that we were with them. Next. So the first thing we did, they took us around, and that's us and myself dealing with patients that were complex. They showed us around to the most complex patients to help them with what the future care would be of these people, and that's us with the small team. Next. Next slide. After several hours of rounding, and this is what we did every day, we gave lectures to over, in that audience would be about 30, 40 of the surgeons at Lviv Hospital on anything having to do with trauma. At that point, we did that for several hours, and then after those lectures each day, next, we met with, this is the group meeting with the mayor of Lviv. Of course, he's asking us if we could help set up and help this hospital since they don't have as much experience as we've had in treatment of major traumas. We also at University of Miami, by the way, train for the last close to 12 years. Actually, it might be even 20 years. All the fast forward teams of the military, of the army that go off to Iraq and to Afghanistan. I helped to coordinate that with Jay Weiss, with Ross Letton and Governor Graham at the time that started this program, which has continued. Next. And then the other day after our lectures, we were surprised because in the middle, you see a short man with a green jacket, but next to him in the blue shirt to his right is the Minister of Health of Ukraine. And then in front, that gentleman with the blue vest is the head of all of World Health Organization for Europe. So it just so happened that we all met. They knew we were coming, so the Minister of Health came, and that's where this program started. He requested, we came up with a program to send 4 surgeons to Lviv. Along with that, set up telemedicine. Along with that, Aaron has a group of ex-retired special forces individuals that do combat casualty training. And since that time, I just want you to realize that the amount of training that's gone on through the organization, it's probably double, because this was just about a month and a half ago. GSMSG has trained 900 Ukrainian soldiers in tactical combat casualty care. They've trained 4,000 Ukrainian civilians in trauma casualty care. They've trained 20 Ukrainians and trained the trainer roles. They've held trauma and burn surgery training lectures like we did to 200 Ukrainian physicians, 50 in person when we were there. And then the second day we were there, we trained over 150 through Zoom. We advise Ukrainian emergency medical support groups in commands and chemical weapons and incident mass decontamination procedures. And we've also translated the United States Army Tactical Combat Casualty Care, which is used by all the services in the US. And we've translated it into Ukrainian, and there's been 20,000 downloads by the Ukrainians so far through this organization. So next, what I do want to show you, I've been there now 2 times. I was there a couple of weeks ago because I just didn't feel like a few days was enough in organization. I wanted to do more. Lviv is a gorgeous old city. You would, at this point, you would not know it's at war, except for the media, unless you saw all the soldiers running around, a lot of people dressed in combat, in their combat uniforms. Next. You wouldn't know it unless the night that, one of the nights I was there, this is myself in the stairwell as advised by my security forces, just because of not being able to get to a shelter. So that this trip, there was missiles again. The difference was we did hear the vibrations. Exciting, but at the same time, it gives you the reality that you are in a war zone, even though you're in this beautiful city with people still trying to live their lives accordingly. And then next, and of course, around the city, what you realize when you're walking around, all the churches have protection with sandbags around the icons. So if you didn't see that, you'd think, oh, because the Ukrainians are just such a tough and very, very they're just a tough people. They're they don't as people would think, they don't consider themselves Russians, and they never have. So it's just it's and they're very warm. It turns out that some of the security guys that I was with that were training combat soldiers, the 2 that were taking care of us were actually born in Ukraine, and one of them was once a Lubavitch Chassid, his family. The other one celebrates Shabbos while he's there being deployed. And I also asked him, because there was some controversy you've heard with the Azov brigade in Ukraine with their saying that there's a lot of right-wing neo-Nazis. What I want to tell you is he's actually been with them, and I asked him, and he said, "Icky, that's my nickname. It's the media. Actually, he's been with the Azov brigade, working with them, and with combat casualties, there only maybe 1 or 2 might be very right wing, which is probably less than what we have in our own military here. And he tells them that he's very Jewish."
Dr. Ginsburg, I really want to thank you. It's as you all can see, I mean, these stories are unbelievable. That's why I talked about the second Jewish hero here in the phone, put himself in harm's way, and all of the scenes and all of the people that we, that we have collectively saved through our support of his group. So I really want to thank him. I'm sure that Not only does he do it from the bottom of his heart, but his Jewish heritage sort of informs this need that we all feel to heal the world and to save people. So we could spend hours. I have
Yes.
spent some time with Dr. Ginsburg listening to the stories, but we need to move on the program. So really thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And now I wish to introduce you all to Elise Udelson, who's the Women's Philanthropy Campaign Chair. She traveled last month to Ukraine, well, to the border with Ukraine on a Jewish Federation of North America mission to Poland. And Elise is another one of these great Jewish philanthropists and volunteers for 35 years. She's been involved in women philanthropy, in women amutot. She was first hooked onto Federation in a North Dade branch meeting, and the rest is history. She and her husband, Ronnie, have been very involved, and now they're chairing a bus that will go with us to the 75th Israel anniversary on our mega mission that we're hoping that you all will come, and you will also experience firsthand these Ukrainians that were settling in Israel, and it would be an amazing experience. So please register for that. So Elise, please share with us your thoughts.
Unmute.
Please unmute yourself, Elise, please. Yeah, we are having technical difficulties because you're still not unmute. We're going to try to help from the Federation side. Give us one second. Okay, now you're good to go. Go ahead, Elise. Go
Okay,
ahead.
thank you, Ariel. I'm honored to be with the speakers who went before me and to listen to the amazing work that they're doing. And I'm honored to share with you today my experiences on the ground in Poland, as 34 of us from federations around the country witnessed firsthand the Ukrainian refugee crisis. And it is a crisis, as we heard from Oksana. Thank you for this opportunity. How does one even begin to respond when asked, how was your trip? After the journey that Ophios and Cohen and I recently experienced. My first response is, do you have a few hours? My next and emotional response is heartbreaking. To look into the eyes of a refugee, man, woman, teenager, child, rabbi, over 5 million have fled, and see the anguish on their faces and hear the painful stories of escape, fear, trauma, horror. Allow me to paint a picture of some of their faces. We began in Krakow and visited a Ukrainian kibbutz, really a palace that wasn't being used anymore and now has been converted to house 60 refugees. Meet Irina. She and her husband fled Ukraine with their 17-year-old daughter out of fear of violence, Russian violence, and afraid their daughter would be raped by Russian soldiers. Sit with that for a moment. They ran for their lives as they watched cars being destroyed, saw cars on fire, and their city falling apart. They fled in heavy rainstorms, traveling 12 hours to get to Poland, where they were welcomed with open arms. In Irina's words, their friends who stayed behind don't have food and are struggling. We met with people who were professionals in Ukraine and now are working as chefs, gardeners, farmers, drivers, working in kindergarten classes, university professors working as cleaning ladies, all while learning a new language, helping their children adjust, and adapting to a new culture. It will be tough helping them get back to their former lives. The majority of them will never return, let alone to their former life. In their words, if they think about what they went through, they would never be able to move forward. Those who fled their war-torn communities came with enough for 2 days. They had 10 minutes to take what they could and leave. Men aged 18 to 60 must remain in Ukraine. Therefore, about 94% of the refugees are women and children who left their fathers, their husbands, their brothers. And for many of the refugees, it was their first time ever being away. And now they're fleeing for their lives. Sit with that for a moment. Their current needs are entry into the labor market, homes, and cash. And for people who have survived communism, it's terrifying to have Russia barking at their border. Imagine, for many of these refugees, they're Holocaust survivors reliving horror again and suffering from PTSD. Sit with that for a moment. In Warsaw, we met refugees living at the Arch Hotel, thanks to the assistance of the JDC. When they arrive in Warsaw, they're brought to the hotel. It's safe. They've lost everything. They get 3 meals a day. Their children are eating crazy because they thought they would starve. Many waited at the border 15 hours to cross. In the Arch Hotel, there are rooms that are designated for clothing by size, shoes by size, diapers, formula, strollers. The rooms are designated so that they can take care of every possible need that these people have. It's amazing, really amazing, the goodness we saw. Now let me introduce you to Danielle and his family who were staying at this hotel. Before COVID, Danielle ran a restaurant in Ukraine. Then he ran a construction company. His young wife, Masha, was a project manager for an IT company. They fled Ukraine in 2 separate cars. Just a lovely young couple living their lives are now fleeing for their lives. Danielle was in one car with their son, their autistic son, Sasha, and Masha was all alone in a separate car. Their strategy was that Danielle would be able to explain to the border guards that he was the caregiver for Sasha, with the hope that they would permit him to cross. If Danielle and Masha were together, Danielle would have been sent back. They took a risk. Their strategy worked. Sasha's behavior distracted the guards, and Danielle was able to cross with his son. Imagine being a young mom crossing all alone. Imagine being this young couple, not knowing if they would ever see each other again. Now meet this family of 3 from Ukraine. Take a look at their body language. On 2/24, everything collapsed. Near their city, a military base exploded. They taped their windows. The wife is an EMT. They were afraid to go out. Soldiers took their cars, children were shot, people were shot in the street. The first few weeks, they just listened to bombs. The Russian military was getting into their homes and stealing everything. It was very scary. After 19 days, they left. They left their apartment, their business, and everything they had behind. The wife cried. She cried as her husband recounted their story. Painful, nonstop tears. They are making Aliyah to Israel. They never imagined what people would help and give them everything they needed. I asked if they have family in Israel. They do not. Ofi replied, "You will when you get to Israel." Now let me introduce you to Rabbi Moskowitz from Kharkiv, Ukraine, which we saw the destruction and devastation in Oksana's slides. Rabbi Moskowitz took the elderly on in his synagogue from the beginning. People from the subway heard there was food and they came too. Strangers, Jews, non-Jews, he took care of and sheltered anyone. This photo, I hope you can see it. I took a picture of what Rabbi Moskowitz had on his screen, on his slideshow. This is what was happening outside his synagogue window. If you can see, it's his car, and on top of it is a Russian weapon and a cup of coffee. This is what they were looking at outside the synagogue window. Days later, a bomb in the middle of the city turned it to rubble. That's when he knew they had to leave. 20,000 Jews were in his system. Thousands of cars were trying to get out. Train stations were packed with people trying to escape. Now, as we heard from Oksana, winter's coming and the rabbi is worried about the elderly who remain behind. Rabbi Moskovitz was providing aid, housing, food, but it became too dangerous to stay. He fled with his young family. It took days to get out, but eventually they made it to Israel. In his words, in Kharkiv, he served the community. In Israel, he was on the receiving end. He returned to Poland, where we met him, to help coordinate relief efforts in his community. His job is not done. Marina came to New York in 1989 from Odessa as a refugee through the support of Jewish organizations. This summer, she traveled to Warsaw to help establish a summer program for Ukrainian refugee children aged 5 to 16 at the Ron Lauder School. I wish I could show you all the children playing on that playground, but we were not permitted to photograph their faces. They were children being children for the first time in a long time. At this camp, Marina wanted the children to feel safe and have an outlet to help deal with their grief and trauma. For some, they've been in isolation for months. Marina told us that one day, the older kids stayed at lunch an extra 20 minutes, comparing notes on how long each one was in a bomb shelter. Sit with that for a moment. Marina brought her teenage daughter with her from New York City to Warsaw this summer to work at the camp. Marina is a product of our systems and she's paying it forward. Meet Katya. She was in Budapest at the start of the war and couldn't get back home to Kyiv. So she is now a one-woman call center, answering phones in 4 different languages. You can see she has 4 phones with her. She told us of a woman who called from Ukraine while we were there. She needed baby formula. Within 2 hours, Katya arranged through the JDC for formula to be delivered to this mom. Another young Polish mom, not a refugee, was on maternity leave working as a volunteer, and she established a home for pregnant mothers or moms with newborns. She recognized this need and opened a home to accommodate them and provide a sisterhood or support system until they can get on their own 2 feet. Remember, many of them were there without their husbands. The women take classes there, look for work, cook for each other, and care for each other's kids. It's an incredibly beautiful setup. Next photo. That little boy gravitated to all the men in our group. I snatched him and held him and hugged him, but he was in such need of just male companionship and male hugs. And he was a delightful little boy. So sad. Anyway, so much has been done and there is so much more to do. They're expecting a second wave, winter's coming, and the needs will be different. These are all people like us, working people, professional people, everyday people trying to rebuild their lives. With all the faces we saw, the stories we heard, and the hugs we shared, we realized so much goodness and so much hope. The professionals and volunteers on the ground are working tirelessly 24/7 to help provide housing, job assistance, food, healthcare, mental health care, trauma support, education for the children, art therapy for the children, assistance in helping them learn the language, and on and on and on. Next photo is beautiful little Diana. Diana? Yeah, it's Diana signing the artwork she made for me. Art therapy for the children is a way to express pain and trauma that isn't spoken, but their drawings tell quite the story. And all of this work is being done thanks to the JDC and Jaffe and our commitment to assist those on the ground to make it happen. At one of the hotels, Jaffe is working to help expedite the process of Aliyah for those who want to go to Israel. Volunteers are helping them with the paperwork and what to expect. Take a look at this young mom and her daughter sitting in a room at the Arsh Hotel. They're just refugees trying to get to Israel. The JCC Krakow has been on the front line providing much needed services and items, classes, childcare, etc. for the refugees in addition to everything else they provide for their members. They have classes so they can learn Polish, Hebrew, and English. Hillel has opened a day center for the refugees living in small local homes as a place for them to go and have a hot meal and have play spaces for their children. The weariness is lifted from the homes just a little bit, the homes hosting the refugees, and the hosts get a little relief when these people can go to these day centers. They're helping the refugees register for Polish Social Security. They're helping with the children's schools, and they're helping them with doctor appointments. Goodness and hope abound. We saw it firsthand through our overseas agencies, JDC and Jaffe. But here we are, 6 months later, and we hardly hear anything on the daily news anymore. And the needs remain tremendous. We can't sit and do nothing. We must continue to act. We were able to respond on 2/24 because our infrastructure was in place on 2/23. We were able to respond thanks to you and all of our generosity and continued support and commitment to the JDC and Jaffe. We've raised over $3 million in Miami and over $73 million overall. Our work has an enormous impact helping to alleviate pain and suffering. Our work really cares for those in need. Our work really saves lives. Our work really provides hope. Our work lets people know they are not alone. Our work really strengthens Jewish life. My 7-year-old granddaughter FaceTimed me very late one night in Warsaw. It was after midnight. She had no concept of a time difference. And she said, "Nana, why did you have to go so far away to do a mitzvah?" My response to her, "Maslin, we need to help Jews and people anywhere in the world where our help is needed. As the Talmud teaches, Kol Yisrael arevim ze bazeh. All Jews are responsible for one another. We have a responsibility and we have the ability to respond." Rabbi Michael Shudrish, Chief Rabbi of Poland, has had 7 strangers living in his 2,000 square foot home for the last 5 months. They're not strangers anymore. And I quote, Rabbi Shudrish, "We succeeded in saving them from death. Now we need to give them life." Sit with that for a moment. I'm grateful to all of you for allowing me to share just a small glimpse of the humanitarian refugee crisis that I witnessed. Please, please, I implore you, let's all continue to be vigilant and do our part to give them life. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elise, for those wonderful words and stories of all of these amazing people. And I hope that your statements and those of our other speakers are really, really inspiring to recharge the communal batteries of us continuing this amazing work. For those who have already given to our campaign, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And please share the story, share what you heard, talk to your friends, your business associates, and hopefully send them a link that we're going to be sharing with everybody through the chat and email and ask them to help. And for those who haven't, again, you're going to have this link in the chat and via email. Please help generously because as you saw, the needs are amazing and the job that we're doing is a daunting job of resettling all of these people and bringing them life. So thank you everyone again, and may we have better news soon and may we continue to doing this great holy work. Thank you.